going through my entire songwriting process on a stream. I find that for myself, the beginning parts, when I'm experimenting with new melodies or I'm experimenting with new ideas, it's hard for me in the beginning part because I have this insecurity of like, oh, what if people are gonna think my ideas are dumb? Which stops me. It's not about what other people are thinking right now.
Once you kind of commit to some constraints, then it can evolve within that and it can expand and grow. When you work with people, it's them. They're doing the work. It's their business. It's their life. But they might not get there in the same way without talking to you. But that entrepreneurship is in some ways fundamentally creative and spiritual, depending on how we approach it. People sometimes say to me, they talk about their own stage fright. And I'll say to them, oh, that happens to me too. I get really sweaty. That happens to me too. Like my heart starts to pound. Again, sometimes. Were you inspired by Rick Rubin's podcast?
Yeah, a little bit of that.
Have you heard it?
I've listened to that before, but it's more of like I really align with that way of making things. Of like,
yeah.
I don't like to. I don't always need to create for an audience or anything like that. I just like to.
Yeah.
I just like to make things, especially like with like when I stream myself making music. Like, I don't need to like talk to an audience or anything like that. I just enjoy people watching me in the zone. It's just like it's just like the way that I like to create the content. I don't like making like a flashy intro or anything or trying to like hype it up too much in the video. Like I just like to I like to make it feel more authentic and like imagine if someone was just like walking into a conversation between the two of us, like just passing by, like what would they hear? I
Yeah.
wanted to feel like that.
Yeah. Okay, can I ask you about that? And
Yeah.
maybe this is part of it officially. But like what is it about that being in the zone? Like because I relate to what you mean, so I'm curious to hear more about that.
In the like when I'm in the zone of making music or just like
Yeah, you were saying you like to like have people see you when you're in the zone. Like when you're in the zone making music to stream it, not because it is made for those people, but to for people to witness that.
yes, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll share more about that because like I first started my YouTube and my Twitch for my personal music side because not because I wanted to build an audience, but because it was more of an accountability tool for me. I created it more of like an accountability system. So when I first started it, it was just like me streaming my studio sessions, and the outcome that I wanted with it was to be able to look back a year from now or 2 years from now and be able to um uh like be able to just look back and see all of the hours that um that I've had. Just like be able to see that like man like how like when someone gets like really big and or someone blows up and they're like, "Oh man, is this person an overnight success?" Like I don't I don't want people to feel that way with me. I want to show the evidence of like, look at all these things I worked on. Look at all like the hours that I put in. And it's like it's the proof right there. It's the evidence. And if you just scroll through, it's just hours and hours and hours of me working on my music. Um, and I've just kept that consistent ever since then. And so people seeing me in that flow state is more of a byproduct of like how I've started this. Cause I didn't really care if like what I look like in front of the camera or what I do. I just wanted the camera rolling so that it can like capture this footage. Just for like logging it, almost like a diary.
Well, it's interesting a bunch of levels, but that you say it is like an easy type of content to make because I think for like I get that, but I think for a lot of people it would be very vulnerable to make. And so I think it's really interesting. But I also get the accountability of it, right? Like you put yourself in a fishbowl and you have to act a little differently in the fishbowl because there's a little awareness that like it is being observed, you know? And so I think like you're saying the accountability, I think deciding on that format and then being like, I'm in it. And then you really reap the rewards of seeing the progress, whether that's just for you, but I don't know. Like I think it like you said, as you were saying, like it is connecting with other people. Like that seeing that progress would probably be useful if it was only for you, but I bet it's even more useful in the world because other people can observe that and can see the modeling.
I got this idea from watching like Kenny Beats. He's like another producer,
Mhm.
and my friend, he introduced me to him, and he used to do like Twitch streams and stuff. I was like, oh, I'll just stream myself making music too. And then it's just kind of like in terms of the vulnerability part, like I feel like that's just been built up from me running this business, like getting myself out there. Like I've already been running this business for like 3 years so far. So being in front of the camera or like showing myself being vulnerable in front of the camera, it's like it's something I've built
Oh, yeah, yeah,
tolerance
totally.
for. It's gotten easier, like just naturally already. So if I was first starting this like 3 years ago, I would have been a lot more
Mm.
nervous. I probably wouldn't even have this idea of doing that. Um, but I know I've learned to enjoy being in front of the camera and not like the camera is more of like an
Yeah,
observer,
yeah.
and I just act like myself in front of the camera, and it's like doesn't matter if someone's seeing me like in person or through a video, they're getting the same
Like,
version
do
of
you
me.
explain things? I haven't seen your stream, so, like, do you ever explain
Hmm.
things? Or, like, do you ever have, like, a technical issue and you're like, sorting it out? Or is it really just an observer and there's, like, no explanation, and if there's l
Ninety
yeah.
percent of the time, yeah, yeah, good question. Because 90% of the time, it's usually just observer. Like I'm not teaching in these videos. I'm not like
Mhm.
explaining what I'm doing, but just by people seeing the process, like seeing the raw process.
Yeah.
Because there's videos out there where people will break down their tracks, but then it's like after they've made it, but you don't actually get to see the full like 20 hours of them putting that in to one song. Like you just see the end result and then what they select that you get to see. So I just like the rawness of like being in there in the process with me and unveiling the
Yeah,
process is
yeah.
like I think it's like super important and actually seeing the work that goes involved with putting working on your craft. Like a lot of people say that, but we don't know what that looks like for everyone. So I just want people to see like me working on my craft. And then I also a big reason for doing this as well is like I wanted to see like how my process evolves as I get better. So I can look back on like one of my first streams and be like, I can laugh at myself and be like, wow, I was so like slow back then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think it's so important
Yeah.
being able to laugh at ourselves. I heard a podcast episode, we can link to it if you want to, but, and it was Gio Valente, Valant.
Uh-huh.
I may have the name a little wrong, but it was on the Knowledge Project, talking about different reactions you can have to failure or to challenges,
Uh-huh.
and obviously there's like negative reactions we can have, which sometimes are motivating. Like to get angry at yourself can be motivating,
Hmm.
but it tends to not be like the most sustainable source of fuel for yourself, right?
Sustainable.
Or
Hmm.
you could learn from it, which is often where I've been at, right? It's like, oh, I really want to learn from this. Like,
Uh,
let's figure out the lessons. But then he pointed out, and he's helped like PGA Tour golfers and stuff like that with this kind of thing. And he said
uh,
even better than learning from it is being able to laugh at yourself, because if you find it humorous,
mm,
it's a totally different energy in yourself. And also sometimes it just is funny, because like it's either something that like just went wrong and it's like, oh, ha ha, like as if that could go wrong, like, or I find now, like, even though this was just a suggestion, I didn't think, "Oh, I'm gonna laugh at myself all the time." Like, it's naturally happening now. I'll be like, "Oh, that's kind of frustrating. Oh, but I'm learning from it.
uh-huh.
Oh, but isn't it actually kind of
You got any stories
hilarious?"
about that?
That do I have stories about that? Yeah, I have a big story time. Not a
Yeah,
big
yeah.
story time, but I was gonna mention, that I think like you being in this because you've been talking about this process of streaming your studio sessions for a
Uh-huh.
while, and I know other people who do different versions of behind the scenes stuff, but you were definitely one of the influences where I decided to, within my Substack, do some vlogging, talking more about my
Oh.
studio process, like more of the behind the scenes of what I've been working on, because I'm working on some fairly big research and poetry and audio and sound projects that
Mhm.
are a lot of like deep diving in my own creative process. And I
Yeah.
noticed that when I would talk to people about it in conversation, it was kind of like too much for one conversation. Like I'm sure you found, like if you tried to
Mhm.
tell someone about all the things you're learning in the studio, it's like too much to be contained just there.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
so I decided, okay, like I'm going to do these sessions right here in the studio to kind of bring people into my process, really give a deep dive behind the scenes. And I'm also starting my own podcast, so it's kind of part of that.
Yeah.
It's stuff that's like too deep and extended for a podcast episode so that there can be like a
Hmm.
secret behind the scenes community for the podcast that the people that want the real stuff. Well, not it's all
Yeah.
real stuff, but who want the uncut extended version, which is where it gets
Hmm.
kind of funny. So I'm like, okay, where are my like creative constraints for this? Okay, it's going to be unscripted, so I'm just going to sit down in the studio and eventually I'll show my process more like what you're doing, but I'm just going to like give some background and talk
Hmm.
about it. I have lots to say, but I'll see what happens, like understanding that I'm going to learn from the process, right? And I said, okay, it's going to be uncut.
Hmm.
Like I don't want to I know can have some perfectionist tendencies, right? So I don't want to even give myself the
Yeah.
opportunity to edit it, which sounds like kind of what you're doing, right? Like I'm just going to
Hmm.
talk at the camera and there's no cuts even if I make a mistake. And the very first time I record, my video dies. And I think to myself, and it dies in
Oh
after
no.
like 10 minutes. So I think, well, now I have to cut it because I have to finish that. And I realized I said uncut. So I'm going to post it anyways and just talk in the next video about what I learned from my video dying. And then in the second video, the same thing happened, but for different reasons. Like I thought I had sorted out the technical stuff, and so I that was part of the reason I asked you because I find often when I sit down to work on audio stuff, on music, on like most of the
Hmm.
time, it's really smooth sailing and there aren't technical issues, but when there are, they are sometimes just like just whammies out of nowhere that really. And so
Yes.
I actually thought about this in advance with what you were doing because I thought, well, if I streamed myself from the studio, I would be streaming myself restarting my computer. Like trying like dealing with
No,
things
that's me.
freezing and stuff. Yeah. Okay, so that kind of thing has happened to you, yeah?
Yeah, like sometimes like I'll just be working and then I'll open up a plugin and then I have this one plugin that's like just really buggy all the time because it takes up a lot of memory from my
Yeah, yeah.
computer. So I'll open it and it's kind of like crossing my fingers. And then sometimes I won't expect it. I'll open it and all of a sudden my whole dog crashes. I'm just like, like I don't say anything because I'm just so shocked. But then, so then I have to open it up and then see like where the last time I saved was. That usually gets me frustrated. One thing that I've learned about this process of like recording myself and things like that is that um, it's good because it keeps me accountable when there's a camera in front of me. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like slack? I'm not gonna slack off in front of the camera. Like, I'm gonna be if the camera is recording me. Like, I gotta work. So that's also like another. That's just part of me of like what helps me keep accountable. And I feel like that's why it complements itself so well. But then I've learned that like sometimes sometimes it's good to stream and sometimes it's good to not stream as well because at least for me at this point, I'm trying to get used to I'm trying to get used to going through my entire songwriting process on a stream. But in I find that for myself, the beginning parts when I'm experimenting with new melodies or I'm experimenting with new ideas, like I tend to not like to stream that side of like the beginning part of my process. I tend to like it more when I've got an idea rolling. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna finish it, and I get in the zone there in that flow state of just editing and tweaking things. I find myself naturally better at like naturally it's easier to stream there because I know what I'm doing. But then the insecurity, I've learned that it's hard for me in the beginning part because I have this insecurity of like, oh, what if people are gonna think my ideas are dumb or something like that? Um, which stops me. So the thing that helps me get out of that is just remembering that it's not about what other people are thinking right now. It's just literally just like just experimenting and just testing. But then also I've realized too that I don't have to force it if I don't need to because there are times when I need to be in that flow state where nobody is watching me, not even the camera, and that's okay. Um, so so yeah, that's just what I've learned throughout that process as well. And I think I'm trying to so this year I'm gonna try to be more consistent with like streaming when I work on music, even if it's just like the beginning stages as well. Because I just wanna, I just want, um, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like I just want to be more consistent with that, um, and that's where I am in the process so far.
Well, it sounds
Yeah.
like you felt out a process around possibly protecting some of that space, or like or seeing what it's like to
Hmm.
be in that more vulnerable state without being observed, and it sounds like maybe that's almost like a next step or a next either a stretch for you, or even if it's not a
Yeah.
stretch for you anymore because you've gotten used to it, like a stretch for including your audience in in a new way.
Yeah, that itself, because what I feel like it's evolving into is less about just what I do on my DAW and on the computer, like making music, but it's like documenting my music career throughout. So like now my streams have, there's been some streams where I don't make music, but I will DJ on stream. Or there'll be streams where like it'll be me on the DJ record pools, which is like where DJs like download all their music, but it'll just be me listening to music and trying to figure out what is my catalog that I want to have, what is my set list that I want to have. So documenting that process as well. So it's just like now I want these streams to be just like a documentation of like was everything the behind the scenes of myself as like a DJ producer now, not just like making music, but everything else that's involved. So it's expanded
Yeah.
as I've expanded my
That's so
career
cool.
in
That's
that
so cool. I
aspect.
love that. And
Mm.
as I was saying, I think I was inspired directly by you. So it's as well as others, but it's not surprising. But that it's like once you kind of commit to a container of some kind, right? Some constraints, then it can
Mhm.
evolve within that and it can expand and grow. I think whether that container
Yeah.
is a business or a business model, which of course can change a lot, or whether it's like a way of sharing and your process with your creative work. And
Yeah.
as you're doing that, I'm thinking, "Oh, wouldn't it be amazing to have you voice over what you're thinking about since you're not talking about it? Like
Yeah.
to like play it back
Mhm.
or play it back 2x speed or whatever, and I'd be
Yeah.
curious as you're selecting."
Uh-huh. So the way that you're doing it, you're gonna do like more of like a synthesis thing where like you work on things, but then you create like a vlog where you're talking about what you work on. Is that what you're planning on doing?
Yes.
Because I've been trying to think about how can I do this with this coaching business now? Because I'm gonna go more all in on this YouTube channel this year, and I do want to have that almost like same. I want to have similar content where I'm documenting my process now in the coaching business as well, and but I'm not sure how to do that because what am I gonna do? Like record myself just typing out content? Like I could do that, but yeah, how are you doing it?
I will answer how I'm doing it, but what I was gonna say for
Yeah.
you though is that, like, if you kind of like
Mhm.
create the content, you could give a little background on why you're creating that content, or what, either before
Uh
you
huh.
create it or before you post it. Like some of
Yeah.
that can be a lot of different things, right? It can be like the feeling behind it, or I see some business coaches
Mm.
deconstructing the ways they're weaving their message and why, so that so they're actually
Mm.
telling the people they're marketing to how they're marketing to help those people learn about
Yep.
marketing, but they might not do that within the marketing itself. They might talk about it
Yep.
somewhere else. And I also see some people, maybe not on, well, some people may do it on YouTube, but sometimes people will do that kind of thing. Their Instagram stories, right? They'll give some background and
Yeah,
behind
that
the
makes
scenes
sense.
on what they're doing and why they're doing it, or yeah, different angles on it. So what how
Okay.
it's evolved for me is I started the
Yep.
Substack kind of as a fun thing, to be honest. It was kind of a fun on the side because I have a blog on my website,
Uh-huh.
and that's more straightforward updates. Some of it is personal and about my process, but it's not deep dives, it's not creative writing. Uh
Mhm.
and I post some things on social media, but obviously like it doesn't long form writing doesn't fly. um And so the Substack started as a bit of a challenge for myself to just have a bit of a playground for photographs and
Mhm.
long form creative writing. and I realized I had a lot to say. I realized that I was enjoying having a place to be able to write longer pieces because I naturally do that on social media anyways, and then I have to cut it. You know, like
Mhm.
I'm a writer. Like once I get the juices flowing, even if I edit it back, and sometimes it, of course, is a great practice to write something big and edit it back. But it was like it was a
Mhm.
I thought I was giving myself places to play creatively, and I realized, oh my goodness, I haven't been sharing longer pieces and longer, not just longer pieces, but like I haven't been making these deeper explorations available to other people, not just for myself because that playground is fun and that's cool, but like I am actually holding
Mhm.
back the ways in which I could help other people or connect with other people or share my journey,
Oh,
partially because I just didn't have a
yeah.
place for it. It's like I didn't have a notebook with big
Mhm.
enough pages, so I just wasn't doing the thing. And so it was just an
Yep.
experimentation. And it was part of a challenge that some other people were doing. So it gave me a little bit of momentum. And I found I was enjoying it. And I found it was also tying into this larger research poetry audio project I'm doing, which is
Yeah.
researching my great grandmother's writing and her life because my poetry is using a parenting handbook that my great grandmother wrote in
Oh, okay.
1933 in India.
Oh, dang.
In India, because she was an educator and she was a sociologist. So she had this sociological perspective, and she also had these perspectives of being a mother of 6 kids and being
Mhm.
working in education in teaching teachers, right? Like train the trainer in the 1930s, right?
Yeah.
And clearly being just really dedicated to wanting to make an impact in the world. So I started talking a bit about that project. I found images from her
Mhm.
yearbook from the University of
Oh, dang.
Toronto from before, which was a whole other thing because that's not my project isn't about her in university. But what I was finding in it
Uh-huh.
was so interesting to me, especially because the photos and the writing I found were from I think it's it it's in my Substack, but 1911 or 1912 or something. Like women couldn't even vote then, and here she is, like
Mhm.
in university, making plans to do missionary work overseas, and her quote in her yearbook was simplicity, sincerity, service. And so it was so interesting, right? Like seeing her write those words as her own motto in 1911 or 1912. And then I'm reading her words she's writing to try to help parents in 1933, you know? Um, and so I was sharing some of that in the Substack. And I realized that in particular with this poetry project, which is turning into something that I'm going to make other art around beyond the audio poetry and sound art that is this specific project because it will ultimately have some visual poetry, but that what's being published is an audio project. And I mean, I already knew this, but it became increasingly apparent that the whole process leading up to it had all kinds of things that I would like to share with people, and that it's useful to my own, I mean, selfishly, it's useful to my own process to share. I understand what I'm doing in a different way when I share it with people. It's interesting to people. Like I'm doing this work and it feels helpful and in service of other people and the project to share it along the way. And I was uncovering so much in my research that I realized that the final art piece is not going to reflect everything I'm learning in the process. It's not supposed to reflect everything I'm learning in the process. Like so much is going on for my own journey in the research, and that is in a way what the project is about. It's more about my relationship to the um the media texts that my great grandmother made into to her messages and to her like her words in her media, and it's about how I relate to that and how I'm interacting with that and recreating it on like partially like a conceptual art level, right? So I thought, well, okay, I need to have a way of talking to people about this. And I was kind of talking about it on Instagram, but that really wasn't sufficient. I needed a longer form place to be able to talk about some of the behind the scenes process. And as this was going on, I also realized that I want to start a solo podcast. So I have a podcast called the Infinite Improvisation Podcast with a podcast partner, and that's music focused. And we talk about things that aren't music too, but it's clearly improvisation, creativity focused. And I'm doing voice coaching for podcasters. I'm really interested in the podcast space. So it became sort of obvious that I wanted to have a podcast. And yet, as I mentioned earlier, I knew that the level of behind the scenes was a bit more than I like. I didn't want the behind the scenes to take over the whole podcast. As much as that might make one cool long episode, I had a lot more to say. So what I decided is that the Substack would be like a sort of central gathering place for the different aspects of me, right? And so
Yeah, like
yeah, it's like
the
the hub,
hub.
exactly. So there's the writing side of it, and then I'm basically starting with this vlogging experiment while I'm also producing the first season of my podcast, which will be solo episodes. Not and those will have a little bit of behind the scenes, but I'll be talking a lot about other aspects of my work, like voice and coaching and helping people, and like that side of things as well. Um, and the vlogging go ahead. I'll pause because that's a lot.
I definitely wanted to jump into more with like your journey with getting into that podcast. Like, and of course, we've talked about it before, but your journey of helping going from going from teaching singing to now helping people with their voice with podcasting, and not just exclusively singing as well. But um I did want to ask, like, what do you feel like has evolved with now the mission of your projects now? Because I feel like for both of us, it started intrinsically motivated, where it's just like I just want to do this for myself. But then I've learned I've just seen like the growth of my channel and seeing how it's impacted other people. And what I feel like a big shift for my own musical journey was when I shifted from tactical to the more spiritual aspect. And same thing with the business too. When I stopped looking for, oh, what is the next best strategy? What types of content do I need to make? And I focused in more on like, how do I feel when I'm creating the content? How am I trying to reflect myself through my creation? That's when the business and the music started blowing up even more. And then it became more sustainable as well, just because it was more fun to do that. And now my mission is to help, um I feel like it's to help other creatives find that shift and find like and help them like find their calling as like to be a professional creative by deepening that spiritual emotional side of
Yeah.
their art and themselves. So that's where it's like my mission has evolved into, but it didn't start that way. So for you, like, where do you feel like your impact is going to be with this project?
Well, I really relate to a lot of what you were saying. And it's interesting, I think as soon as we start talking about the more spiritual aspects of it, well, for me it's very resonant because our
Mhm.
voices are literally like pre-verbal, like they before we were humans speaking English, we were still humans with voices using them, and
Mhm.
there are really there are things that go beyond words in terms of our experience with our voices and our experience connecting with other people with voices, right? Um,
Mhm.
but also in terms of impact. And you were talking about helping people find something, right? Like find their calling or find
Mhm.
something. And this is something I think about is the language around how we help people. And that isn't a criticism of that language. It's a wondering, because I find I try on different words, right? Because in a
Mhm.
sense,
Yeah.
um, as And I'm going to talk really big picture, and then we'll bring it in. So
Yeah,
ask
go
me
ahead, go
questions
ahead.
along the way for sure. Um,
Cool.
that people often seem to feel disconnected from their voices, or actually afraid of their own voice in some ways, or
Hmm.
ashamed or embarrassed of their own voice. And I can relate to this. There have been times, even even times where I was performing on stages and I was using my voice as a teacher in groups, and I'm getting paid to perform, and I'm being like held up as like an example of these things. And to listen back to myself, I would literally cringe. I would literally, if another person was there, I would sometimes literally start to hide my face, even though I had
Mm,
recorded an album and released it, and I'd done radio interviews and I'd done all these things. It was still difficult to face my own voice because I had feelings and baggage around it. So I really relate to where
mhm,
people are coming from. And so it can sometimes feel like we're helping people find what they already have. You know, like I'm guessing you believe that people have that spark in them somewhere. But it's sort of, it's like
mhm.
wiping off a windshield. I had to wipe snow off the windshields today. You know, like you clear off the windshield, and it's the same windshield, but
Mhm.
it's a totally different experience for the people in the car, right? And then it can sometimes like
Yeah.
get fogged up again, you know, and we got to do something
Yeah.
about that. And so when it comes to the voice, I'm lately thinking of what are all the different words that can describe this experience people have of, sometimes we talk about you know, finding our voice. We found our voice, and I relate to that because there's things I've been able to do with my voice that it certainly feels like I found
Mhm.
something, because I wasn't doing that before. And I
Yep.
did find a skill, I did find an awareness, I did find an understanding, but it's a little different than that. It's like finding, it's like a realization, right? So I sometimes I'll use words like empowering, or sometimes
Yeah.
there's, you know, realizing, or reconnecting, or reawakening,
Mhm.
or rekindling. But there's definitely this quality of support, right? But also there's a quality of like transformation and of kind of alchemizing, right? Or like catalyzing
Mhm.
something that it's ultimately, when you work with people, right? It's them. They're doing the work. It's their
Yeah.
business. It's their life. But they might
Yeah.
not get there in the same way without talking to you.
For me, I feel like personally, I've gotten through that whole cringing at myself stage, and I don't know if it's a defense mechanism or something like that, but I feel like I've just learned to not care about that insecurity anymore. Like the insecurities I had, like, oh, like what if I mess up in front of the camera or anything like that? Like I really don't care if I say ums or anything because I feel like the work that I had to do before, like when I first started my creating my course for teachers, I did like slideshows and it didn't have my camera, so it's just a voiceover over a slideshow. And every time I'd say or something like that, I have to like in post process. It takes so long to edit all of those out. I'm like, I think I got to the point where I was like, it's too much work, like too much work to care about that. So I started over time like not caring about it. But I think where I'm at right now is I still want to learn more about the potential. Like I see there's a lot of potential with my voice as a speaker, but I don't know what that looks like. Cause like for example, yesterday, one of my clients, she was talking about she's talking like she has a music school, but then also she has like a dog training business, and she's just talking about how there's so much potential with like your dog, and that most dog owners don't actually unlock that potential of what a relationship that they have with their dog is. And a lot of people think that having a dog is just something that they can like walk around outside with, but a dog can like detect cancer, and a dog can be able to like be able to be this be this whole other like thing that you need in your life, but most people don't realize it. So like where have you seen like what is the potential that you see with your voice that maybe like someone like me may not have known, or maybe if there's like a instance where you're working with someone and they had that aha moment? Or like, what are some of those aha moments where people have realized the potential of their voice? What does that look like?
Yeah, totally. I love that you used the term unlock, because our voices have huge potential on a whole bunch of different levels. And that was part of the reason for my shift from focusing on singing, which I still believe in the power of singing. But I noticed that most people, some people see singing as very important in their lives and as very potentially transformative. Sometimes singing is the aha moment for people. They desire that. And by exploring that, that does unlock something for them. And so I saw that and I loved that with working with people with singing. And so I'll start there actually. Just on a singing level, people would say things like, I'm new to singing and I felt like I could be playful and explore and I didn't feel intimidated and people were after really short workshops with me saying things like I feel more confident and I just feel so inspired and I'm thinking, "Oh man, like I had less than an hour with you. Like give me some more
Yeah.
time and like we're really going to get cooking, you know?" And 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 so that's on a singing level, also on a creativity and improvisation level. And I think this ties in to using our voice in ways that aren't just for singing, right? Part of it is about all the buildup before we make a sound, right? Our our internal sense of our voice, but also our internal sense of expression or creativity, right? Our role in whatever space we're in or like however whatever our our creativity or our voice, whether that is through singing or whether that is like through an instrument, like who it is reaching and why, right? Like the context. um and creating contexts where like we can be the beneficiaries of our voice, right? Where we're giving ourselves that permission, right? To unlock things, to explore, and sometimes that is a physically building skills. Sometimes that is just physically creating awareness and vibrating things that haven't been vibrated in a while, right? Like there's a lot going on a physical level, but some of it is leading up to that physical moment, right? And then some of it is after. What do we do with that if we're wanting to perform or if we're recording, whether it's singing or speech, right? Um, and I've for a very long time I've worked not just with music but also through theater and through media arts and through various art forms at helping people through the arts. So and this was when I was training and working at the Royal Conservatory and then they're learning through the arts programs and in early childhood music. Um, Although it is partially about the art form for the sake of the art form, it's also about the art form for health benefits, for, music is it's literally a workout and exercise in some cases, right? It improves our mood, which is huge. It can improve our immune function. Like there's these like really, really concrete benefits, right? But also cognitive benefits and social emotional benefits and like it can hit on all these different levels to accomplish things beyond studying music for the sake of studying music, which I've done a lot of and I have helped people with a lot. And within studying music for the sake of music, we get a lot of these benefits. Having come from that background and having also come from community-based arts and interactive theater and um, theater for social change and research into neuroscience and the impacts of music on cognition and child development, right? Um, then after I'd started my business and I was in more of a traditional music educator role in some ways, I was seeing big, amazing changes in people, but I also saw that the context of music education wasn't always acknowledging this incredible potential of using music and creativity for even more. And in some cases, the approaches of music education were actually hindering in really obvious ways. And like I would notice both children and adults could often play piano specifically, because piano voice, like, it doesn't surprise me if someone can sing better than they think they can, because our voices as a singer are very innate. We are naturally made to be able to mimic things in a way that is pretty mind-blowing, and I think not everyone realizes that they have this innate capacity for mimicry that they can really leverage. But particularly on instruments where, like, you don't expect people to be able to play better than you think they can necessarily, right? And they don't expect that of themselves. And if you set people up with the right context, the way that even young children or even adults who aren't that experienced can sometimes improvise is so far beyond what they think they can do, what I've heard them do. But if I try to, like, clamp down and um, get them to perform something perfectly every time, as much as that can teach them things too, it's a totally different experience, and they end up really underestimating their own ability. So I have been seeing this happening with singing, where I say the word singing and people get like a fear in their eyes. And so I found, as I would talk to people
Yeah.
about voice work, and because I had done so much work in community, I knew that this could help entrepreneurs. And when you're talking about like a larger spiritual purpose, um, I of course have been on my own entrepreneurial journey and figuring out not only how I can adjust my business to fit with me in alignment on all these different levels, right? On a practical level, but also on that spiritual level where I feel I'm helping other people and helping other people who make impact themselves, which is something important to me.
Finding that alignment though, like going from, because a big part of, I don't think many people would know right off the bat because we've talked to each other for a while, but the shift that you made from going from helping musicians to now helping entrepreneurs, but staying in the same skill field level of what you have like worked for. Um, what was that like? Like going from, like, what did your voice studio look like now, and then how has that evolved into what you are doing now with podcasting and the work you do with other entrepreneurs?
Well, and I think through this I'll be able to give you some more of those aha moments too,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in terms of the impact on people. Um, so I already knew that I loved talking to other entrepreneurs and helping other entrepreneurs, because I have been helped so much through the generosity of others, through people sharing their journey, and um, through this like new media small business revolution, right? Like where there's this, truly is this rising tide, right? And I think that at this point
Mhm.
it is really like countless lives that are being positively impacted, not even necessarily always through being entrepreneurs themselves. Although, and I think that entrepreneurship is in some ways fundamental, entrepreneurship on a an individual level, or on a micro level. I'm not talking about business as a whole necessarily, although maybe, but that
Mhm.
entrepreneurship is in some ways fundamentally creative and spiritual, depending on how we approach it.
Mhm.
Because it's our impact in the world, like it's our if we were thinking of it in spiritual terms, like it's our ministry, or in religious terms, it's our ministry in the world. um
Mhm.
so I was already thinking a lot about this, and I was even doing some workshops for entrepreneur networking groups, and talking about their voices, and about how they could use voice work for their own wellness, and for
Mhm.
improving their professional skills through using the voice, and through um, exploring their voice to both improve their skills, but also improve their sense of well-being, so that they can reach people effectively, so they can do their work
Yeah.
and feel good about it, and have it be sustainable for them, um, as well as, I mean, I know sometimes voice and communication are considered soft skills, but I mean, I would say as well as a hard skill way, in terms of like physically checking in with their voice, their actual vocal
Mm.
expressiveness and stamina, and like these more like the hard skills of the soft skill, so to speak. Um, and so through this, I was noticing that if I talked about singing, people didn't totally get it. And often people uh, will tell me about traumatic experiences that they've had with music or with singing.
Mhm.
Sometimes when I've just met them, like I'll say what I do, and people are often either really excited, they'll say, "Oh, I've always wanted to sing, but," or "I love to sing, but," or "When I was a kid,
Ah,
I
yeah, yep, yep.
sang, but then someone said something, or I felt pressure to go a different direction, or I feel like I've lost this part of myself and I want to pick it up." Like things that are pretty, like the types of comments that seem a lot more than just singing, you know?
Mhm.
um, or people would say, "Oh, I know this person who loves to sing, but I could never." Or people would say things like, "Even my
Oh.
cat doesn't like to hear me sing," or "You wouldn't want to ever hear me," or like things like that. Like I was noticing these very strong reactions to talking about singing because I was talking about singing more than music because just in terms of the evolution of my studio, I'd been working
Mhm.
um, with mixed age, mixed instrument classes in online groups with kids, and having a lot of fun with that, and um, with creative games and formats for learning together online. And I realized that although I was enjoying that, although there were amazing things about that, and I did a 2-year pilot and made a resource, and we can link to that, and that was all great. But I realized that to reach adults in a way they could reach other people, that specifically
Mhm.
the voice had power. And then as I talked about it more, I noticed people were almost, some people would really get it and lean in, and some people would kind of pull away because it
Ah.
had this powerful element that was tricky for people. It was sensitive for people. So I,
Mhm. Were, like, people
yeah,
intimidated by
totally. Like
it?
people are like
Oh.
thrilled by the idea of learning to sing, and they're also scared of it. And like I get that. Like
Mhm.
I've performed since childhood, and I have worked on my voice since childhood, and I still sometimes like I shouldn't say, I mean, even today sometimes of course I have to work on my mindset, and I have to still keep exploring and keep learning. But I mean, I've had some like ups and downs where I really didn't feel as connected with my own voice. So I was evolving in this
Mhm.
direction of a singing focus, and also working more with adults. I'd worked as well doing like professional development with teachers and early childhood educators, and increasing the impact that other people have is something that really gets me fired up. As you can tell, whether that's
Mm.
entrepreneurs or whether that's people who are making impact in other ways, I think everyone is making positive
Yeah.
impact in some way. And so,
Yeah. I'm glad you were talking about, like,
yeah,
alignment too. That word's, like, so, so important. So, like, when did you find if you feel comfortable sharing, like, where was the part where you didn't feel aligned, and how did you know you weren't aligned with what you were doing, and how'd you shift that into something like, when was that point when you needed to shift into something in more alignment with how you felt, if that makes sense?
I do have a moment I remember, and I will come back to it because I have to say the thing about alignment and about pivots is that sometimes big changes can happen really quickly. I find it's often years in the making. I've been using the metaphor a lot of a spring coiling up, and like you can pull it back really slowly and then it can release really quickly. And so sometimes we can have really quick shifts. Like someone can come to one of my workshops, I can do one session with them, and suddenly they're thinking of things in a new way. They have all kinds of new tools and activities and things to take away, to action on, to keep moving in their own journey. And like it's a quick thing. But I have to say, for my own like my own life, my own entrepreneurship, there are many confounding factors, so to speak, right? So it's taken a lot of little shifts, and there have been kind of like some big quick things, but it's been a whole bunch of small decisions to to lead to big decisions. um
Yeah, you got one that
yeah, and so
comes to
some of that
mind?
has to do with, I'm also a poet, like I'm a multi-passionate, some people say multi-hyphenate, but like I'm an interdisciplinary artist, right? I work across disciplines, and my business was more and more music focused, and my art was becoming more and more poetry focused. And I've done poetry workshops, and I'm definitely comfortable as an artist facilitator, teacher in that medium, but I was very much in the world of music. And that's not a negative, but it became very apparent to me in terms of the shift in from singing to podcasting and to speech. Although I had done non-singing voice work before, and been in theater contexts and things like that. Um, the I started to think, like, how can I make all the different aspects of my life come together and make sense, right? And, like, rather than feeling like I have all these different pockets, and like the it kind of like shifting from having multiple businesses to having one personal brand, right? What am I letting go of, blessing and releasing? Like, there what am I grateful for, but it's not necessarily the season that I keep pursuing that. Like teaching piano. I've loved helping people with piano, but I came to realize that I wasn't going to build a business around piano lessons any longer. And that's not a shade to me playing piano, to the people I've helped, to the people I may help in the future, even, or to other people who help folks with piano. I just realized that it wasn't what made the most sense for me. And that even though in some ways, just on talking about a spiritual level, right? In some ways, I had an attachment to my identity around piano, to what if I'm not helping as many people, if I'm not helping people with that thing, right? And so it took time to sort out what's intuition, what's attachment, what makes sense strategically, what makes sense based on what opportunities are actually around me, what am I working on cultivating long term. I'm kind of thinking, like, what do I actually want my life to look like in 10 years or 5 years or 2 years or 20 years? Um, and I may have lost the thread of the question, but it's coming together. I had all this drive to help creatives and entrepreneurs and people helping people, and sometimes I saw the connection between the singing and that, and other folks didn't, right? And I realized that in my own life, focusing on just music and not bringing in um, creating media products, which is something I've been involved in different kinds of media products from. I released a book this year and a book of poetry. And that's the other thing too, is I realized, oh, I'm going to cultivate my career as a writer. I mean, I've been pretty steeped in poetry in different ways. I was poet laureate in Sound, and I knew I was publishing this book, but it became apparent to me, if I'm going to publish one book, I'm publishing books for the next 10 to 20 years. Like, I'm not publishing one book. I'm publishing like several books at least, you know? And so that becomes a much different conversation, right? And like, also, if I'm going to help people with their voices, I would have people say things to me, um like, oh, like helping people prepare for karaoke, and I was like, no, accessing the interdimensional portal to their entire, like it's about like going deep into their own potential, and it's about creating relationships with other people, and it's about like how they live their purpose in the world. It's not about karaoke, guys, but I can also help with that. But or people would say, and I am grateful for these people. It's not that I had so much concern about being misunderstood, and I was very misunderstood, and that just like drives me, as you're saying, more to like, there is some pain in that at times, but to not worry about it so much, right? Like, I still feel cringe sometimes, but the bigger mission of helping people is, and by helping people, like, that can sound a little like, oh, I'm helping them, but by that I mean like supporting them, mentoring them, like being of service however I can. And specifically, not just however I can, but specifically in these ways that I know can really move the dial, or can really compress time for folks. And sometimes people would say to me, there's not much of a market, like other business owners. They'd say, there's not much of a market for voice coaching, is there? And I would think, every single person has a voice. what is going on in our culture that we think that the main thing we communicate with, that is literally the way we get our needs met from the day we are born, and is generally like a primary tool we use for negotiation and sales and connecting to the people we love most and whispering our deepest secrets to people and like communicating the most basic of social interactions, that like what is going on with our culture that we don't feel that it is important to connect with that, you know? So my I as I delved more into singing, I was really struck by this, and struck by like a tension within myself around how much I was willing to put on the line to be an example, right? To get on stage vulnerably, or to get in front of a camera vulnerably, and to show up imperfectly in service, right? And in service to myself as well as others, but in service of changing the narrative around how we relate to our voices. So while I was more focused on singing, again, I was getting asked about speech, and I knew I could help people with that, but just wasn't the main focus at the time. I developed a framework for working with people connected to alignment. And it's called Aligned Creative Embodiment. Because what I saw is that, so I'll just unpack each of those a little bit, and then I will tell you about a moment that like a thing's changing.
Well,
Yeah, yeah,
can I share what's
yeah.
sticking out to me so far? Two things. One, what you're talking about with the piano thing, because I really felt that as well when I was a big part of my story and a big part of like the mission here of what I'm helping teachers do with the coaching is like find their find their balance between teaching and being their core self, musician or whatnot. Being able to know how to scale their studio without burning themselves out. So, like for me, I remember when the coaching business was taken off, and this was like kind of when COVID was just lifting a little bit, and I remember when I was like just getting burnt out with not just uh teaching piano, but like school, like music ed degree, and then the coaching as well. And it got to a certain point where like I couldn't move anything forward anymore because I didn't have the capacity to. And I felt this was a whole year long process of me not taking on any more piano students and just like letting go of the ones that just naturally want to leave. And that was just a whole year process that could have been cut so much shorter if I didn't have the biggest thing that was stopping me was the insecurity of the attachment of like attaching my identity to teaching piano. And I felt like, oh, if I don't teach piano, who am I to coach teachers on how to grow their studios if I don't have a studio anymore? And I felt that insecurity like for so long, and until my last students left and I didn't have that anymore. And then I started learning that that like um that's okay because my impact here is best served like helping teachers, not just students. And if I'm trying to teach teachers to have a healthy, balanced lifestyle as they're growing their businesses, like I need to be able to practice what I preach as well. So I feel the same way with like feeling attached to my past self. And that was stopping me from being able to move forward. I feel like a lot of teachers feel that way when they are in that stage. Because I like helping a lot of teachers who are in that stage of like know they're entering a new chapter. They know they need to keep growing their studio in a different way, but they're just so attached to the way that they used to do things. So I think that's a huge part about like
And
those
it's been
shifts.
an evolution too. And I sometimes I think, could I have done this faster? Maybe.
Hmm.
I mean, also, I'm a whole
Yeah.
person living a whole life, and there have been other things going on, right? That create friction and slow me
Hmm.
down. And sometimes those are little adjustments, right? Like, oh, I have low iron. I was really fatigued. That makes it harder to move forward in my business. Like, you know, sometimes it's things like, oh, you can't plan for grief and put it in the calendar. And sometimes, you know, you have to pause and take care of yourself. Or sometimes it's not, sometimes that is like
Hmm.
a total pause, or sometimes it's a, patience, like a scaling down, and then resuming those changes as like as you kind of are gaining the strength, but it's definitely
Mhm.
been, and I think I help clients with this often around reckoning with insecurity and with what is more
Mm.
important, whatever we're trying to do, or the discomfort along the way. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes, I don't just think, people sometimes say to me, like, they talk about their own stage fright, and I'll say to them, "Oh, that happens to me too." Like, I get really sweaty. That happens to me too. Like, my heart starts to pound. Like, and sometimes that's not even on stage. Sometimes that's like a Zoom call where I have to introduce myself, and I'm having full-fledged stage fright over introducing myself on a Zoom call to do, like I have done so many times, right? But that
Mhm.
I do have techniques. I have lots of different things I can do to prevent that. I think why that actually comes up sometimes in
Yeah.
easy things is because I might skip some of that prep if it's an easy thing, and then it comes out of nowhere, right? But
Mhm.
that it's about, as you were
Yeah.
saying, having the larger purpose. Like, we might feel self-conscious, but I know that the way I can reach people is greater than my own self-consciousness. And I think some tough
Yes,
like, I've
yes.
come off a stage, like an actual brightly lit stage, and felt horrible about what I did for whatever reasons, right? And sometimes that is like totally a delusion, and sometimes there are things I could have done better, right? And I just know it, and I
Mhm.
feel that, right? And then someone lets me know it's
Yeah.
really impacted them in some way, or something that was really challenging to create and really uncomfortable in the creation process. Actually, I'll give a specific example.
Mhm.
The preface of my book I wrote after writing all the poetry, like while I was getting the book ready to go. I wrote the preface, and it was a really hard process. It was really uncomfortable. It was
Mhm.
it was challenging. And someone sent me a message and told me that the preface of the book made them cry. They hadn't even read the book yet, but they
Oh.
connected with the preface. And I thought, wow, I almost wanted to cut the whole preface. I almost didn't write it. I almost, in the process, I felt so, even though I was writing it with the intention of reaching people, I was writing it with the intention
Mhm.
of creating context or of deepening, uh, either deepening their relationship with the writing in the book, or like opening up the window wider for them to enter the book, or the door. Maybe not the window. They can come in the window if they want.
Yeah.
um, and that, I think that intention, even though it was imperfectly executed, even though, like, I actually found errors in the preface I had to fix. Like, they were, and I did fix them.
Mhm.
Like, that was a difficult process for me, but the intention behind it, I think, came through, or at least in the feedback I've received,
Mhm.
and it was worth it.
I think that's so important because, like, even when we're talking about the growth of our studios, and if we want a lot of teachers, they want more committed students. They want kind of like that next level student. I feel like if we let those insecurities like control us, we stop ourselves from being able to serve different types of clients as well that we are meant
Yeah.
to serve. Right? Like if we're sticking with the same people that we already help, like we limit ourselves from being able to help different types of
Yeah, and
clients.
actually, so
Um,
realizing that, I mean, I've I've thought about these things for a long time, and it became kind of clear, right, that the way I'd done work with
mhm.
children is not the same as what I'm able to do with an adult. Like, this was becoming
Yeah.
apparent, but um, I was still figuring out what that was going to look like in my business. If you can, I can talk a little specifically about kind of the stages, the eras that went through.
Mhm.
But I remember I was in a mastermind call with a bunch of other music educators, and I think it may have even been the mastermind call where I met my podcast partner, because I met my podcast partner in a mastermind call with people I didn't know, in from a Facebook group I almost didn't join, but I knew a little part of me wanted to, keep building support around me for my business. So it was that little part of me, right? Like that got me there to that call.
Mhm.
Um and because my podcast partner, like, we met because we both had an interest in improvisation and creativity, so we're like, let's talk. And within
Oh, nice,
within
nice.
a very short period of time, we decided to make a podcast. Within a few months, we had it recorded, we released it. Like, it was a pretty quick creative process. But I think it was the same call
Mhm.
where I was describing what I do. I remember so clearly. um I'll have to send this episode to the person who said it. I was talking about my business
Nice.
and about what I do, and he said, "Oh, that's so awesome that you can be that person in your town." Meaning, like, the person people see as, uh like, he meant it really positively. He meant it like the person that people see doing creative music stuff and the person that people refer to for music lessons, and you're really, like, increasing the music jive happening in your town, like, good for you. It was meant to be so supportive, and I heard it,
Mhm.
and I was like, "No, it's not for the people in my town, like, I'm doing a lot more than that." Like, I didn't say that, but, like,
Ah,
hearing that feedback that
yeah.
was supposed to be a compliment, I was like, "No, no, like, you misunderstand, like, right now I'm helping the people in my town, but, like, I'm building this program for so much more than that." Like,
Yeah, like, I'm meant for so
yeah,
much
like,
more.
and it's really stuck with me, of because I am community oriented, and it is important to me to build up my town, so to speak. But I have had to think about, like,
Mhm.
do I put all my resources into building locally, or do I try to help other people who make impact in a broader way? And I mean, it wasn't really
Yes.
even a choice. Like, I was clearly reaching way beyond my town, and I live in a small town. I love helping people in that small town. That's what I love about doing this work online, is that I can help other people in their
Mhm.
small towns that wouldn't necessarily have access to going to a big city and learning arts facilitation skills at this, like, I like where I trained, and how I received, some of the mentorship and education I've received. Some of it has been in small towns, not in these big institutions. And I'm not suggesting that there is, a superiority necessarily, but there was definitely like an
Mhm.
access that I was blessed with, right? In terms of both
Yes.
in terms of like the actual mentorship and training and skill cultivation, but then also the opportunities I had to practice that and to see examples and to like build a career and to then use that like to go from freelancing to then building a business and entrepreneurship. And even though I
Mhm.
was definitely running my business with the intention of having a social enterprise model that was making a difference in the small town, like, that's what I was doing, it was true, but hearing someone say it,
Yeah.
it bugged me. I just knew that I had
That's
so much more to
interesting.
offer. I knew, I knew that how I could help people needed to go beyond just my town, because to be honest, there aren't enough people here who are like looking to do the type of things I can help people with. And don't get me wrong, I'm, now for say, for helping people with podcasting, I've been talking to lots of local entrepreneurs about how podcasting can help them and can help their business, because
Mhm.
podcasting can be amazing, for businesses to work towards all kinds of different goals. And but what is really exciting to me is that I
Mhm.
can both help locally, and I've been going to like local business masterminds and networking and like intentionally cultivating that local community, but I'm also intentionally
Mhm.
cultivating my international community and reaching people who
Yes.
are, I mean, I'm talking to you right now. I'm talking to I
Yeah,
like
I
I'm
know. Like
recording with people who are from all over, and I'm realizing that rising tide, if I can think both locally and globally, that it presents different kinds of opportunities, and that's important to me, not only
yeah.
for myself, because I could just stay local. Like, I could do that. It's not really
Mhm.
just for me, although it's fun, and it feeds what calls to me and like my desires, and like it is for me,
Yes,
but
yes.
it's not just for me. It's also about setting the example for other people, that especially with podcasting, that not only can it be a
Mhm.
powerful tool for what's close to them, like geographically, or what's close to them, in terms of their own rise and their own desires and like what's going on. It can also be this really
Yeah.
powerful expansion tool, or like quantum leap tool, and that I need to show up and go first and be that, and that,
Mhm.
like, again, I have so much respect for the local grassroots approach, and no disrespect to people who really focus all their energy locally, I just knew though. I knew I was already reaching out beyond that. And so maybe I'm a little contrary because sometimes having someone say something that I just don't quite, it just doesn't quite land. And it's, again, it's not a disrespect towards that person, but like I can sense it in myself, and it gives me a message.
Yep, yeah. No, that's super important. Yeah, the second thing too, because I do want to hear about a little bit about that framework as well. The second thing that you said was like the karaoke thing too. Like you could help people with karaoke, like learn how to sing better at karaoke, or you could help people like reach into that new dimension that music like helps you reach towards. And yeah, that is like if we were thinking more strategically of like what I actually teach my clients, like that is the type of messaging that we need to have. Like every single teacher needs to have. At first, it comes with us understanding and us really feeling and experiencing that spiritual side of music, that side where like you get out of reality and you like transcend into like literally a different place, like a different source where you get your ideas from. Like first is experiencing that and then helping other people realize that as well. And I feel like just the marketing aspect really comes into now. It's like strategically, we want to talk about
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
like the emotional, the spiritual side, because that is what it's like. It's not only just going to get us more students, not only going to get us more people who understand that as well, but like fulfilling wise, like I want more people to know that. I want more people to realize that. And that's what we need to teach as music teachers. It's not just like how to sing better or how to sing in tune or how to play the right fingerings on the piano, but it's like with how do we connect with people through music? How do we get those words that can't be expressed through English or any other language other than the sounds that music can create. So I just wanted to mention that, like
Totally.
that's a huge part, not just strategically on how to be able to attract better students, but like fulfillment wise as teachers and
Yeah.
mission wise.
And I mean, like, karaoke can be a symptom of that. Like, karaoke can be one of the
Mhm.
things that results, you know? But I think particularly with the voice, it can have this transcendent experiential quality, and it
Mhm.
really quickly can let us know that our experience of space and time is a little more malleable than we think. And music in
Mhm.
general, um but specifically singing can also have really powerful ability to put us into a bit of a trance state and help us practice that, whether that is on a spiritual level, and like a specifically spiritual level that we are exploring the interdimensionality, let's say, but also in terms of
Mhm.
like on a self hypnosis, self care. Like you can use that ability to tap into a light trance state, um,
Mhm.
for caring for yourself and caring for other people and working with your mind in really powerful ways. And when you're talking about
Yeah.
connecting with others through music, and helping others experience that transcendence, and or it may not be just, it may actually be just transcendence, because transcendence can sound like, oh, we're skipping the living, but like that transcend, like that can mean like a deepening of purpose, that can mean like an awakening to
Yeah.
reality. It doesn't necessarily mean transcendence in terms of escaping, so to speak.
Mhm.
But that starts with ourselves and our relationship to ourselves, and whether we want to connect with other people and cultivate um, better relationships. I could say deeper or more sustainable or more interdimensional. um, whether that's
Mhm.
through music or whether that's through speech and through our message in other ways. There's a self cultivation that can happen first.
Mhm.
And so, and we talked a little bit about kind of like the mindset and the setup for that. And so
Yeah.
sometimes it's about exploring or learning from the voice on an awareness level and a non-sound level, because our voice, I see our voice as an intersection. Like, it's literally the intersection
Mhm.
of where we eat and where we breathe. Our larynx is um designed to keep food out of our lungs. Like, the function of our voice
Mhm.
is scream when you are born until you are cared for. Continue to scream so you don't die. Continue to express any way you can to ensure your survival. you know um, and then use your voice the way you're told. you know um,
Mhm.
but its function
Yep.
is expression for survival right away. um,
Yep.
and then through this wonderful learning process, expression in other ways that are beyond our immediate needs, but then also keeping us from
Mhm.
dying, like keeping the food out of our lungs, keeping our breathing right. um our breathing
Mhm.
functioning, and breath is of course so tied into singing specifically. And that
Yep.
I see it as a portal inwards, because when we sing,
Yeah.
not only do we have these experiences, and also I should add that, like, instruments are almost uh, subbing in for singing. So when I say singing, that could be expressing the voice through another means, right? Because um,
Mhm.
it's like through those pathways and through that um that motor activation, which interestingly, by the way, dancing is linked to our speech pathways. So like dancing is like speaking
Oh,
with our
interesting.
body. And there's some really
Oh, okay,
interesting
okay.
research around vocal mimicry and species that have higher, like birds that have more vocal mimicry capacity, have bigger brains, and they also dance and can dance mimic. Hummingbirds actually clap and sing. They will, like, they create
Oh,
rhythms
interesting.
with their word, like it
Dang.
is. And and we have like these same innate abilities plus some. Like, we have more abilities than a hummingbird, but it's really core. And so reconnecting
Yeah.
with that, um and it is involving more of our whole selves. So whether we are then
Mhm.
exploring the dimensions of our creativity for our own satisfaction, or whether we are developing and strengthening our skills to then perform in some way because that is part of our desires and goals, or whether it's about, like, developing that, which, when I say portal inwards, it really fine tunes our awareness, our physical awareness, but also our mental awareness, our awareness of our mindset. A lot of times with the
Mhm.
voice, just by shifting your awareness, you can change the sound and change the outcome. And it doesn't always take a big
Mhm.
physical change. With the alignment piece, like, it can't, the physical changes can't help. Changing your physical alignment can totally be part of it. But also sometimes it's changing the
Yep.
mental alignment or changing the intention, right? Alignment is about, like, where are we going? Where are we now? And, like, how are we
Mhm.
aligning in the process? And so
Yeah.
that inner work then facilitates the outer work too. And so that when we are talking about our business, we're reaching people on levels that are not only on the conscious level of the words, because if it was about the conscious level of the words, we could have an AI robot voice read our offer, right? Our words are like, this podcast could be a
Yeah.
transcript read by someone else and it would still be effective. But it's not
Mhm.
just in the words, it's also how we are saying it, which I think has that spiritual preloading, right? And if we're showing up
Mhm.
to do our work that we believe so much about, but we're in
Yeah.
insecurity and we're thinking that our voice is, like, not right because it hasn't been fixed by a professional, or that, like, that we're behind in our vocal skills compared to other people, or all this stuff, right? If we're not in our voices, we're not going to be activating that full potential for how we can reach people.
So how does that tie into now, like, was that the framework that you're talking about again? And, like, I know been going on for a bit, so, like, you don't have to explain it all. I feel like we could just have another, like, even, like, conversation, another, like, video about this. But yeah, how does that tie into now what you do with, like, helping
So
people
I
now?
developed this framework thinking a lot of singing, but knowing it could apply to speech. But then the more I've applied it to
Mhm.
thinking about speech and podcasting, it's really resonated. And in using it with
Mhm.
people, what I love is that it adapts to the individual, because we have different, like, it's a smorgasbord of who we are and where we're at and what's going on with us, right? Like, everyone has a different pie graph of what they're already feeling confident
Mhm.
or capable with, and what they aren't so much, right? Um, and
Yep.
so aligned creative embodiment, the idea is that the alignment piece, as I said, is partially physical, because there is physical alignment involved with our physical voice, but it's also about aligning our voice from the inner voice to the outer voice, right? From the purpose
Mm.
and behind it. And that purpose can have a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be an outer mission based purpose, but it often is. But that purpose
Mhm.
can be personal as opposed to impact in the world, as in,
Mhm.
through our, as I was saying, through our own deepening of awareness and possibility with our voices, that will inherently, whatever we do after that, it's going to help that, right?
Yeah.
And so I mention that because for some people, they're pretty comfortable with their creativity. Maybe they already are making content, or they already have a podcast, and so the getting it out into the world part makes sense to them, or their creative process part makes sense to them.
Mhm.
But it's the alignment of how they can explore, and like the voice itself, before we even start
Mhm.
adding meaning to it, right? Like the pure sound
Mm.
exploration,
Interesting. Yeah.
before there's words involved, right? Or before there's even intention
Yeah.
involved, and then the intention can become part of it. So sometimes that alignment is about the whole process, right down to how we were marketing the podcast, right? Or the product, right? But sometimes
Mhm.
that alignment is a very
Yep.
personal thing. Um, and then the creative embodiment part, I mean, those are two separate things. I call it ACE voice because I align creative embodiment.
Yes, yes.
Um, Creativity, again, is also a very innate human thing, and something that
Mhm.
I find doesn't always occur to people, that their voice is so innately, I was gonna say fiery. Like our voice is like, has so much going on creatively if we allow it to explore. And
Mhm.
creativity also, there is an intuitive exploration process. So part of the creative part of the framework is opening up that, as we were talking about the things beyond words, right? Opening up the playground
Yeah.
so that we can move faster, because we're allowing ourselves to move in a non-linear way, right? Like I could tell you,
Yep.
okay, I'm going to be really thorough. So we are going to sing scales in every key and every vowel. And that's what we're going to do for our whole voice lesson. And isn't that thorough? But I'm sure we can both agree that if you had the opportunity to creatively explore, like how play based learning for children is becoming increasingly recognized as important, but also effective, right? Same
Mhm.
with for adults. If we give that creativity a place, we can use it for what we
Yep.
want, which is why the alignment comes first. But allowing for that creativity in a very specific way, right? Because if we don't get specific
Mhm.
about it, we sometimes avoid it because it's a little scary, right? So a lot of that has to do with different kinds of vocal improvisation. That doesn't have to be
Mhm.
musical. It doesn't have to be melody oriented. Sometimes it's more rhythmic. It can be musical and melody oriented,
Ah.
but I find, so part of that is using the power of music and everything music means, and our all this knowledge and experience we have in music. And part of that is saying, well, let's not think about what we think music should be, or what we think exploring the voice should be, or learning singing should be, or because it's not often not about singing, right? Like what we think we should do or what the experts are
Mhm.
saying. Let's see what happens when we are really in our process, letting those creative elements like feedback and nurture us, that we're in our own feedback loop of exploration, so that we can harness our unconscious as well as our conscious. And so that rather than me saying, this is how it should be done, we're saying, hey, let's check in with how we can use your creative powers for where you want to go. Now, the other part of that, though, is creative mentorship, because sometimes we need some help in our
Mhm.
creativity, in terms of choosing and designing our creative process, right? Because like it's fine
Mhm.
for me to say, here, go in that room and be creative. But like
Yeah.
we work well with constraints, right? Creative limitations.
Yep.
In I in the Infinite Improvisation podcast, we did a whole episode on creative limitations and how those things that helps us, right? So part of in a coaching
Mhm.
context, like part of that is helping facilitate experiences of creativity and creative flow to help people get to that. Improvisation is
Yep.
shown to help creative flow in other domains, actually even imagined improvisation, like even so imagining yourself singing a song or singing a song that you're improvising
Yeah.
helps you get in a creative flow state. So that is part of it, but part of it is either coaching or mentorship in terms of how are we self designing or self coaching, or like what can that process look like, what adjustments can we make. It's really helpful to have outside perspective, right? You can be like me making the
Yep.
vlog and talking about the process as it emerges and the mistakes you're making and unpacking it, and that can be fun too.
Uh-huh.
But it can be really helpful to talk to someone else and they're like, oh, like you consider this, or I wonder what would happen if you
Yeah,
tried
it's just a little bit
that, or
faster.
yeah, or I wonder what would happen if you didn't worry about this thing that you're overcomplicating for yourself, because we can really get in our own way.
Mhm.
And the embodiment part is
Yeah.
uh our voice is embodied, right? So the embodiment part is
Mhm.
working with that, like working with our embodied voice, with our perceived sense of embodiment, right? So how we connect to how
Yep.
we perceive our body and our embodiment of things, right? Of practices or of goals or of feelings or touching into that. Um Voice is
Mhm.
a movement practice and voice is an embodiment practice. So it's creating some space to
Yeah.
acknowledge that, and speaking of things beyond words too, whether we think of it somewhat spiritually, and there can be that side of embodiment. Some people connect with embodiment practices on an emotional level, right? um, it can be
Mhm.
purely about allowing the movement practice of voice work, whether connected
Yep, that
to
makes
the
sense.
verbal part or not, right? But it's also about using
Yeah.
those tools, like creating a toolbox of embodiment tools, or practices, you can call it either way, or
Mhm.
creativity, or things that help with our alignment. Kind of building this toolbox so that we can have the embodied experience we want, right? So we can
Yep.
I think often people describe that as confidence. They want to feel a sense of, I often prefer to say courage, right? That going
Yes, I
into
like that.
using their voice, however that is, but particularly if they're like when we're going into using our voice professionally, where there are stakes, where we do have a mission involved, right? Having a sense of courage and confidence that feels embodied, that if we experience anxiety or worry or cringe or that self-consciousness that is natural, right? But we want to work through that so that our embodied experience is more supportive of our goals.
Yep.
And sometimes that embodied experience, some people are already very confident, and that embodied experience is actually
Mhm.
about giving space for the vulnerability, for the exploring, especially physically with the voice, exploring the light, the quavery, the whispery, the creaky, the unpleasant, the moaning, and like the whining, like all these things our voice is capable of that
Mhm.
we sometimes just shut the door on. But sometimes getting into some of that work can open up other possibilities. Sometimes it's about embodying
Yeah.
like a sense of flow, right? That we have a flow in our conversation and in our verbal prosody, like in our tone and how we speak.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's about clarity, right? Sometimes it's about embodying the mission we have, so that in storytelling, like sometimes it's more expressive, but sometimes it is about the storytelling and about how we're um constructing the narrative of our mission or of our creativity.
So alignment, creative embodiment. I love it.
Thank
It's
you. Thank
beautiful. It's
you.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that with me. Honestly, I'm just gonna say I learned a lot out of these like 90 minutes that we've been chatting. So yeah, I feel like oh man, I feel like I could go on and on about this, but like let's save it for like another conversation because I feel like from this, like I personally want to have another conversation about this because we could talk about I feel like we're very aligned on um our values and our beliefs about music and creativity. So I'd love to explore more about that from your perspective. If there's anything I could do for your podcast, if you want to explore my process, then I'd be happy to do that as well. But I just want to say
Ah,
thank you again for sharing all that with me and for
well,
anyone that's
thank you
watching this.
too. I really look forward
Yeah,
to talking again because it's I enjoy this and I learn too from talking with you, and
yeah,
it's great to open the box to bring out the ideas,
yes,
and maybe next time based on people who hear this, maybe there will be other questions or other things that people are interested in us digging into, and maybe we can
yeah.
bring in some collected ideas from people who've seen this about where to go next.
So I know people can probably connect with you like Facebook, Substack, like podcasts. Like, can you give me all of those links so I can put it
Yeah,
in the
totally. So
description?
Instagram,
Yeah. What's the best
well,
place? Yeah.
Instagram's
Oh, Instagram too.
a good
Yeah.
place to
Yeah. Feel
follow
free to share.
along with what I'm doing. I'm by Lauren Best, BY, not BYE as in goodbye, but BYE as in written by. So by Lauren Best on Instagram.
Uh-huh.
I'm also on LinkedIn and I love to connect with people there. People can definitely find me on Facebook. My Substack is Lauren's Best. At the time we are recording this, the podcast portion of this is not out there, but you can certainly find me on podcast players with the Infinite Improvisation podcast. And I'm love to hear from people. So please do not hesitate to send me a DM, get in touch. You can check out my website, laurenbest.com, and get in touch with me through that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone that's watching, definitely talk to Lauren. If you got any questions, feel free to DM me as well. I can answer any questions. But yeah, I just want to say again, thank
Thank
you.
you. I
Appreciate you.
appreciate you too. This has been a pleasure.